All right, so one of the problems with an SLR that doesn't really happen with a compact camera is that it's not a closed system. If you remember, there's a variety of things that are moving around over here. So if you remember, this is that mirror that folds up. Well, I didn't mention this, but it has to fold up and out of the way for the light to be able to pass through it and then eventually onto the sensor. But because these mirrors can actually move up and out of the way and the shutter opens, there is actually a way that you can see the sensor itself on a digital SLR. And so this means that it is essentially exposed to the outside world. Even if you never actually see it, if you change lenses and are taking photos, it is still being indirectly exposed to the outside world. And so for a variety of reasons, whether it be some extra stuff that accumulated because of assembly or because of sloppy lens changing on your part, dust can get on the sensor itself. And this can be a really huge problem and really, really annoying. And you'll notice that although it doesn't necessarily ruin a good image, it can really annoy you to no end when you notice it. So here, this is an image. It's all right, I guess. But one of the things that you'll notice is that there are a couple of pretty bad dust spots on it. Let's see. Oh no, I used to have circles around it that would show you where it is, but no longer. Let's see. Let me go. Okay, I'll just do this. Can you see, if I go back and forth, can you see where some of the dust spots are? And it's really annoying. When I saw this and I saw this dust spot right there, I just wanted to shoot my camera because it's so frustrating. Luckily, there's a couple of ways that you can combat this, but if you're going to, or if you don't already have an SLR and you're thinking of purchasing one, just keep in mind that this is some maintenance that you're going to have to do with an SLR. You're going to have to clean the sensor on it to rid it of dust. And if you don't do that, well, you're going to have to accept that it's going to accumulate and you'll have to clean it up later. So you'll notice that here, for the most part, I was able to clean off all of the dust in software. It's not as visible now, but it's certainly not perfect as if it were there. But this is probably one of the biggest problems of digital SLRs today, because unlike film cameras, the sensor doesn't move. It doesn't recede back into a film canister. You're not changing it out every single frame. So there's opportunities for dust to fall on it. And it is a little bit of a white lie. Dust doesn't actually fall on the sensor itself. There's a variety of filters that are on top of the sensor that we'll talk about probably mid-semester. But for now, you can just think of that whole unit as being the one sensor. And there are ways to combat this that I mentioned. You can use, so the old school way of doing it was actually to have basically a brush, and it honestly looks like a paintbrush, but I'm going to recommend that you don't go to Home Depot and buy any old paintbrush and assume that you can just whisk away the dust on your sensor, because that will be a very, very bad thing, mostly because oh man, this is going to be very anticlimactic if I can't get this off. Mostly because those bristles are not designed to stay on the brush very well. And so they could eventually come loose, and having a big bristle on top of your sensor is a lot worse than having just a little speck of dust. So this basically is what's called a sensor brush, and this was an overpriced brush, really, that you spray some air through to statically charge it. I'm not sure I ever actually believed this, but you spray some air through it to statically charge it, and it's supposed to attract dust away from the sensor as you basically brush the sensor itself and clean the sensor of dust. There are now newer technologies. I believe this particular product is from a company called Visible Dust, and they now have actually limited their products to not just sensor brushes, or they've limited their range of sensor brushes to be very, very minimal. And they now have some really fancy, very expensive brush hybrid combinations, something or other, that are actually supposed to do a better job. But actually, I've never even bothered testing or seeing if that's true. But I will caution that using liquid of any kind on your sensors, even something like alcohol or something like that, is probably not the best idea because you don't want that getting around the sensor and into the electronics itself. Some people will say, oh, it's perfectly fine, nothing will happen, and that may be true, but that's not something that I am going to test for myself. And on just about every camera, on every digital SLR, there's an option that you can't read because the screen is abnormally small, called Sensor Clean. And when you select this, all it does, oops, I didn't select. All it does is you hear the mirror flip up, and it just exposes the sensor underneath. So now, right now, if one of you were to, what are they called? Throw a spit wad into my camera, I'd be a little angry at you. But it essentially is just exposing the sensor to the world right now. And this is one of the reasons why dust is such a problem, and it certainly will be as soon as I close the shutter, is that it's just out there. It's just exposed. But remember that I mentioned that there was a mirror in front of the sensor here. And part of the reason that you hear that shutter click is that this mirror has to move up and out of the way before the sensor can actually be shown. Ooh, I actually have a video of this in super slow-mo, and I hope I remember to bring it. If not, okay, I will get it. All right, I'll probably have to show it to you after the break, but it's this really cool. Somebody actually recorded what happens in an SLR in super slow-mo when a photo is taken and the mirror moves up and out of the way. But in the meantime, while this is downloading from my other computer, you will also notice that one of the things that an SLR also has that I didn't really mention in that simplified overview of the SLR body is that there is a secondary mirror behind the primary. So there's this primary mirror, which is mostly responsible for sending light up into the pentaprism and through the viewfinder, but it's not a complete mirror. It's also just slightly transparent, so light can also go through it while also being reflected, so half of it or so goes through it, and then is reflected down by a secondary mirror. And this is what allows us to get exposure or to do autofocus. Down here, below the mirror box, as it's called, because there's it's a box of mirrors, there are a couple of sensors that the camera uses to determine metering. So it uses that to determine what settings it should use to try to properly capture the exposure. And also it uses it for autofocus. So it can say, okay, well, this looks like it's slightly out of focus, so I'm going to adjust the focus in this direction or that direction. And if you were to actually clean your sensor, and it moves because it moves the mirrors out of the way, you can look down and try to see some of the holes where that light goes down and into the autofocus and exposure or metering sensors. Okay, let's see, did this transfer yet? I hope so. All right, I think I have one. All right, okay, so we have here, I actually have a couple of videos. So first I'll show you one just as a representative example from my camera. And we're going to be looking at a couple of things here. But first of all, this is just a generic digital camera. You'll notice that they've removed the lens so you can actually see the mirror. Let me see if I can make this bigger. All right. And what they're going to do when I push play is they're going to hit the button and take a picture. All right, so it's going, it's going, it's going. You can see the mirror move out of the way. There's the shutter, it's closed, and you saw it open very quickly before it closed again. Okay, if you didn't see that very well, don't worry about that. We'll look at a different one, but I want you to notice something about this change. So take a look here at the size of the mirror relative to the size of this metal ring, which is the mount where the lens goes. Now I'm going to show you a newer camera called a 5D. Notice that the mirror is much bigger. And if you're interested in photography and you've heard of some of these arguments between full frame and cropped sensors, this is one of the primary differences between the two, is the size of the sensor and therefore the size of the mirror box and of the pentaprism as well. So because the sensor is actually larger, in this case the 5D and the 5D Mark II are full frame sensors, so they're actually the size of a full 35 millimeter film frame. Their mirror box and sensor are also much larger. Okay, so hopefully now we should be able to see that same action in a 5D. This is the original 5D, not the Mark II, much better way. And in fact, this one has been slowed down enough that you could actually see the secondary mirror. I don't know if all of you caught that, so be sure that you watch right behind the first mirror. As this one goes up, the secondary smaller mirror also flips up with it. And then right now, for a second, the shutter will open and then it will close right away. And just for a brief moment was the sensor exposed. Okay, and one of the other things, I mean, you'll also see if you look around at reviews long enough, you'll see a lot of numbers being thrown at you about blackout time and delay between the shutter and the actual photo being taken. One of the big things that camera makers try to reduce is this delay between when the mirror has been lifted and the shutter is opened. Because when that mirror is up, no light is being reflected into the viewfinder and you can't see what is happening on the other side of the glass. And this is called a viewfinder blackout, and most of the times having a very low number for this is a good thing, because that means you'll be able to see the photo for as long as possible or see the scene for as long as possible before being able to do it. However, the flip side of that is that only really expensive cameras, and I'm talking about cameras that are, the price of a small car, literally, have blackout times that are really, really, truly good. Most of the time, even on the 5D, which frankly looks slow, it just isn't. It's not really much of a concern, and you probably wouldn't have noticed it had I not mentioned it. But unfortunately, that's part of what this class does. In teaching you all of this stuff, you suddenly realize that you have to spend a lot more money than you originally intended. Okay, and just to compare, and I hope you will indulge me one last time, I want to show you the same thing from a film camera, but this time show it to you from the rear, from behind the camera. And the reason that we can't do this with digital cameras, obviously, is that it's a solid back on a digital camera, but in film cameras, we actually had to remove the back in order to place the film canister, so we could actually see now, we won't actually see what happens to the mirror box, but we can see the shutter move instead as it exposes the sensor behind it. So very briefly, could you see this sort of circle of light? And now you can actually see it's automatically winding to the next film frame. If you're familiar with film cameras, you can actually see for a very brief second, if you just watch it, you'll notice a circle where the lens was passing the light through. And this is actually very important to us, especially later on. These lenses are circular. They don't throw a rectangular light or a rectangular scene onto the camera. It's our sensors and our mirror boxes, because they are rectangular. That is what makes our scene look rectangular and our picture look rectangular. And that's going to be very important to us later on. Okay, I tend to get really excited about this stuff. Please stop me if you have any questions or if I need to go over something a little bit more slowly. Okay, but getting off that tangent and coming back to sensor dust, a lot of digital cameras nowadays have new technologies to try to combat this dust problem on sensors. And usually they come in the form of some sort of fancy ultrasonic vibration system that says that it vibrates the sensor itself or the surfaces in front of it to try to shake the dust off. And I think I even have, let's see, a photo of, or not a photo, but, oh, I do. This is just your lucky day. I'm full of videos this time. And this, unfortunately, is very heavily marketing-based video from Canon, but they still try to show you what is going on in one of these ultrasonic dust systems. But don't, what is going on? But don't pay attention to the marketing speak, and instead focus on the technology at hand. So if you're familiar with Max at all, I upgraded recently to Snow Leopard, and it apparently has bugs that you should be aware of. Okay, let's take a look at this. Canon.
dust adhering to the sensor of a digital SLR camera may have entered the camera from outside during lens replacement, or it may have been generated inside the camera. When dust adheres to the filter on the front surface of the sensor unit, its shadow appears on the photo. An EOS digital SLR camera is equipped with one of three types of imaging sensor: APS-C, APS-H, or 35mm full frame size. Canon has developed a comprehensive system to eliminate the problem of sensor dust for each type of EOS sensor. The solution is the innovative EOS integrated cleaning system. First, the system prevents the generation of dust. Canon uses various mechanisms and materials to prevent the generation of dust inside the camera. Second, the system prevents the adhesion of dust. The filter incorporates anti-static properties, preventing dust from adhering to the sensor unit due to static electricity. And third, the system removes dust that still adheres. To deal with dust that adheres despite these measures, Canon developed the self-cleaning sensor unit. Ultrasonic waves vibrate the filter on the front of the sensor to shake off the adhered dust. This unique Canon system requires minimal space because a special filter is not necessary, allowing the camera's compact size to be maintained. The self-cleaning sensor unit operates automatically whenever the power is turned on or off. But even when it is operating, priority shifts to shooting mode when you press the shutter button, so you never miss a photo opportunity.
Okay, anyway. All right, so that's generally the idea. And other manufacturers have a similar technology as well. And I have to say that I'm sure that it doesn't work 100% of the time, but it certainly will help in combating this dust issue. But one of the problems is that you're just shaking the dust off the sensor and probably on the bottom, to the bottom part of the mirror box. And if you move around your camera, it's probably just going to get back on the sensor anyway. So you're probably going to have to worry about cleaning it eventually anyway, despite these mechanisms that these cameras have.